Hello there YouTube, this is Shua Hendry back with another drawing tutorial. Today we're going to talk about perspective drawing and how to multiply objects back into space. So a lot of times with students, when I'm teaching them even one-point perspective, the concept of how to get multiple objects to be the right size as they go into the distance, there is a pretty good way to figure that out, fairly easy way. And so we're going to talk about that today. First thing you're going to want to do is draw a horizon line across the horizontal part of the page. I typically start with mine in the middle when just teaching basic. And for this purposes, we can just do one-point perspective. So we'll put a vanishing point right in the middle. And let's pretend we're going to do some very basic railroad tracks. We'll get a nice wide base here at the beginning. And so far so good. This looks kind of like a road that's going out into the distance. And now as we go, we start thinking about the railroad ties. What I typically tell my students to do is just get the first one. And the first one, the front edge of your railroad tie, if you're using a clear ruler, usually it will have lines on it that makes it very easy to get a nice horizontal line. So I'll line up one of the lines on my ruler that I can see through with the bottom edge of the page, and then I'll use my straight edge here for the front edge of my first railroad tie. And for now I'm not going to worry about the overhang or the actual rails or anything like that. And let's say my first railroad tie is, I'm going to make it pretty wide just so it's easy to see. Again, using my lines on my clear ruler to line up with the line I just drew, also the bottom edge of the ruler's lining up with the bottom edge of the page. And I'm going to draw this back edge of my first railroad tie. So, there you go. Now, you've got 4 points to this shape, and if you were to see this from a top view, you'd basically have just a basic rectangle. Okay, if you were looking at this directly from the top, but in perspective, there's foreshortening, and so as it goes back into the distance, this seems like it gets smaller. Okay, so we still need to figure out the distance to the center point. We basically need to find out the center point, and the way you do that is draw an X from this front corner to this back corner, and vice versa from this back corner to this front corner. And now this is the dead center of your railroad tie, which would correspond with this, which you could actually measure with a ruler since it's in the right kind of view, a top view. You would be able to measure this with a ruler, which you cannot do in perspective. So now you've got that midpoint, and you want to connect that back to your vanishing point. And so once you've done that, now that you have this line, it will always give you the center of all of your railroad ties going back. So that's a very important line to know. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a heavy line weight, and I'm going to trace around the outside of this first railroad tie that I drew. And I'm going to do this freehand, which means it's not going to be perfect, but that's okay. Sometimes your freehand lines actually have a really nice feel to them when they're going over something that's been done with a ruler. You still have a very straight feel to it, but then you also have this organic quality, a little bit rougher quality than if you were just to use a straight edge. So especially when working with railroad ties, it's kind of nice to have a little bit of waviness and bumpiness to it. Adds a little bit of texture, which is nice. Okay, so for our purposes, we're just going to do, actually I guess it would have been more realistic to say this, or these are boards on a boardwalk or something like that, because railroad ties are going to have spaces in between them. But what I'm trying to figure out is how far back into the distance should I put the back edge of my next railroad tie. And there's actually a really easy way to do this. Now that we've seen that an X will divide this into two segments, if I were, for instance, to line my ruler up along that midpoint, I'm just going to draw a really light line through here. Move my ruler there a little bit. This now becomes two halves. Okay, so this front half, and it's slightly larger than this back half. Well, that same principle, this is kind of dividing that shape using the midpoint. We're actually going to multiply our shape using the midpoint. So I'm going to go from this corner through this middle line, this midline that we found before, and I'm going to go through that, and now that is that's going to become the back corner for my next railroad tie or board, and hopefully I'll be able to explain to you why that makes sense in just a second. Because what I've just done now is I've actually drawn another X, okay? But this time the midpoint of that X became the back edge's midpoint here. So I, in essence, have doubled that board, that first board. I've now made it as though it were one half of a much bigger piece. Okay? So now this and that are equal in perspective. Now again, if this were a top view, they would look identical. The two would look identical. Okay? So this distance here and here are perfectly even when you look at it from a top view. In perspective, the way you do that is by using X's. Okay? Now as we move back into space, I've got this midpoint of this back edge. But instead of going from this corner through that point, I'm going to jump back from this point and go through there, and I'm going to get my next one. So if you have any questions about this, if it doesn't make sense, please email me, and I will definitely do my best to explain it a little bit better. But again, I've done another X, and I've doubled the size of this board to include this shape. Okay, so now that's the X, or the midpoint of the larger shape. So again, if I wanted to half all of these, I really could do that, just because I know that I can form an X in the center of each one of them. For instance, if I wanted to find the midpoint of this board for some reason, I could just draw an X in the center of it from corner to corner. Okay, and there's the exact midpoint of that board. Okay, I could do it for this one as well. If I wanted to find the midpoint of that board for some reason, I could. I just draw an X from corner to corner, and I get the midpoint of that board. Okay, of course, all these guidelines are not necessary to do sort of what we're talking about, which is just extending this pattern of boards all the way into the distance. What's really nice about this is that in a small amount of time, once you get the hang of it, you can very quickly start to get an idea. Even freehand, once you get more comfortable drawing freehand, you can get a really quick idea of how big these boards should be. And you don't even have to draw both of your cross lines. You can just get one point, and if you draw a perfectly horizontal line, you'll know that it's right. And since we did that first measurement from our midpoint here all the way back to the vanishing point, I always have that line with its midpoint, the bisection of that line. And so I can go from this corner now through that midpoint, and I can keep doing that. So you kind of get like this little zigzag pattern going. Again, I use a light line weight. I call these marking lines guidelines, and I'll call the next lines in the series these are my heavyweight lines here, and my light line weight is for my guidelines, the ones that are just kind of there to help me understand where my next object should be in space. So hopefully that helps you. It works with everything from this boardwalk or boards. You could, if you were doing railroad ties, you could sit there and say every other one is gravel, and every other one is a board. And that could become railroad ties. You could say, well, this is a boardwalk heading out to the beach. And so every single board is that in a row, but it works for windows, it works for bridges, like trusses on a bridge, it works for light posts, lamp posts, fence posts, whatever it is to divide space evenly. As you head towards a vanishing point, this is kind of the method you will use. This is my comic book, The Legend of Harapan, that was just came out in October 2013, so very excited about this. If you'd like, the first 8 pages are free. You can go to the website, thelegendofharapan.com, check it out, let me know what you think, and if you want to, you can also buy a copy while you're there. So thanks again, have a good one.